Some of the best art in the world comes from the people who have felt deep pain. Great companies have started at terrible times in the world. We as humans can only get to the top of mountains if we have started in the valleys of life. Addictions plague many people, and recovery from these addictions can be painful on an emotional, physical, and spiritual level. Even in some of the darkest points of life, there can be beauty that comes from the results of the recovery.
I needed a creative outlet to express like my life and all the crazy things that were going through my head when I was getting sober. But what it turned into has been something like far beyond what I ever imagined it to be. And it's been a real great journey.
Tim Stoddart found writing in some of the darkest times of his life. Writing saved him and helped him not only recover from addiction, but also thrive in his life. He has gone on to use his writing skills to help other people become sober and help people become better writers. You are listening to How to Build an Audience, the podcast that tells the stories of how some of the top entrepreneurs, marketers, and communicators built a following around their businesses and brands. I am your host, Matthew Ketosis. Today, I'm talking with Tim Stoddart. Tim founded Sober Nation, the world's leading online recovery community, by writing about his own recovery. He has gone on to help healthcare clinics with their SEO and content with Stoddard's internet marketing. Tim recently became a partner with Copyblogger, one of the top resources in community online for all things writing. Tim has come a long way in his own journey, and now he is using his talents and skills to help as many people as possible. None of this would be possible without him starting to write during his darkest times of life. He started a blog called The Fourth Dimension.
I've always been a writer, I guess, is a good place to start. My mom was... I got it from my mother. My mom was always like carrying notebooks around with her. And I mean, I do the same thing, you know. I know people can't see this, but I got a notebook right on my desk. And it's just something I've always done. I always got a notebook. I always write down my thoughts. And in 2010, I moved to Florida. I'm from Philadelphia, and I moved to Florida. I was struggling with a lot of stuff, and I had a cousin who was in recovery from drug and alcohol addiction, and he lived in South Florida. And so, I was struggling with a lot of addiction problems, and he kind of took me in and just helped me get sober. And at that time, I had never really ventured that far out of Philly, and I just had all these crazy thoughts. I was dealing with emotions for the first time in my life, like I had nothing to kind of repress how I feel. And so truthfully, I was writing anyway, but I didn't really know much about what blogs were. And I had a guy who was helping me. He was like a mentor, and he bought me this series of Success Magazine. And it's so funny to think it was only 2010. It was 10 years ago, but every edition of Success Magazine actually had CDs in it. And we think about that, and it's so old school, but it was only 10 years ago that we actually had CD players in our cars. And this one particular issue had an interview with a guy named Seth Godin. And I was listening to it, and it was the first time I ever heard Seth Godin. And so in this interview with Seth Godin, he was speaking to a lot of these things. This was when his book, I think it was Purple Cow, was probably released about that time. And the very last question that they asked him in the interview was like, what's one piece of advice that you would give to somebody that's starting out? And he said, the one piece of advice is start a blog, don't tell anybody about it, and write in it every day. I don't even know what it was about that. I just heard that, and I thought to myself, like, you know what? I can do that. And I went to Blogspot back when Google still had Blogspot, and that's just what I started doing. I would just write gibberish, basically. It didn't make any sense. There wasn't a whole lot of rhyme or reason behind it. Like sometimes I would write stories, and sometimes I would just kind of diary or journal. Sometimes I would just write like random poems or just free association write about like how pissed off I was at the world at the time, and about 6 months into it, I started seeing that people were coming to my site, and I never promoted it because, like Seth Godin said, it was don't tell anybody about it. And so I just remember I started putting together like, how are people getting to my website? And that was my introduction to search. That was my introduction to optimizing websites. And so the reason why I started the Fourth Dimension was strictly because, well, not strictly, but was simply because I needed a creative outlet to express like my life and all the crazy things that were going through my head when I was getting sober. But what it turned into has been something like far beyond what I ever imagined it to be. And it's been a real great journey.
From the skills that Tim gained from writing for the Fourth Dimension, he started Sober Nation. But the idea came from a little bit of luck.
At the time, the only job I could get was a phone salesman, and I was selling diabetic supplies. Basically, I was selling medical supplies, which till this day was one of the hardest, but one of like the best thing that's ever happened to me. And my friend, who I started the website with, he was selling advertising for basically magazines that you would display at golf courses. And so what they would do is they would have to look up where all the country clubs were in the country. And then depending on where that country club was, they would call all the local businesses around that country club. And then basically say like, hey, I'm putting together the ads for so-and-so country club. It's got like a good demographic, like all the people that come in, see it or whatever. That's what he was doing. I wasn't in the business, so I don't know for sure. But the point is, he would find these country clubs through some web directory. I think it was like golf.com actually. And so he was like really interested in this idea of building directories, because once you have a directory for country clubs, remember like we were both in recovery, and we were starting to see that like the problems up north, especially in Philly, and he was from Massachusetts. So like there was just big drug problems all over, and we could see that people were going to need resources to treatment. And so he came at me with this idea like, hey man, I've had this idea for a directory. And we were really good friends at the time. And that was right at the same time where I was starting to put some of these pieces together with like web content. Like, I think I could build like some kind of brand online. And this was before like online branding was like a thing, you know what I mean? And so, and he came to me with this idea about like building a directory. I was like, you know what, man, I've been learning a lot about this thing called SEO. And I think what we could do is build like some content around it too. And then that way, once we create content, the content would spread, and through that, we would gain exposure to this directory. And it was just going to be an advertising platform for treatment centers. And like, that was the idea. And we thought it was so unique, and we thought it was so brilliant. And little did we know that like the search competition for any kind of healthcare, really, especially behavioral health, is super, super competitive. And like, we had no idea what we were getting into. And so, about 6 months into it, we discovered that like not only was it not an original idea, it was actually like one of the hardest things that like we could get into, And so at that point it was too late. And we were lucky because we were definitely like the first people in this whole recovery landscape to embrace social media. And so we didn't actually have to compete with all these big healthcare entities that had lots of money and marketing budgets, because all we had to do was kind of float on top of them. And we could use our content and our social media to almost write stories about like, look what this person's doing over here, or look what this facility is doing over here. And there was all different types of ideas about like how to treat people that were struggling with this stuff. And so, once we got a little bit better at the skill and the craft of building digital marketing campaigns, we felt more comfortable like competing in there. But in the beginning, like that's really how it started. My friend had this idea and I had this idea, and we kind of brought them together, and then Sober Nation took off.
Sober Nation quickly took off and became a platform for many people to share their stories. Facebook was the main place where people found Sober Nation, but Facebook changed their algorithm, and overnight, the reach was lost. Tim found a way to move his audience off of social media and onto his website.
For the record, I didn't just quit using Facebook. What we did at that point is we just kind of accepted Facebook and social media for what it is. It's, in my view, social media is a tool to drive people to your brand. And then that's what you use it for. You use it as a promotional tool. Like the way that people get themselves in trouble is they build their entire shit on social media and they never actually have like a central hub. They never have something that they own, that they can call their own, and they can essentially build an email list with, So it's not like we just totally gave up on it. It was just a real rude awakening where like no matter what we do, we have to own everything that we create. And so we adjusted that way with one, diversifying. Most of our traffic comes from search. And that's really the case with all of my websites. I've just found that search traffic is by far the most valuable simply because there's like intent behind it. Like if somebody searches for something and they come to your site, you know exactly why they came to your site because you know what they searched. So as long as you can answer that search query, like people go to Google because they have a problem. And it doesn't mean that it's like a life-changing problem. Maybe it's directions, or maybe they just like had a question like, oh, I wonder what that is. The only reason you ever go to Google is because you have a problem that you're trying to solve. And so if you can just position your website and your messaging to be a solution to the problem that people have, because the only reason they got to your website in the first place was to search for the answer to their problem, then you can really make a killing and you can make a ton of money. And so like once I started putting those gaps together was when I really just dove into search. And like, yeah, search engines are just as volatile as social media because they change all the time. And you always got to kind of live by the Google and die by the Google. But, with that being said, I have personally found, not to say that the people that run Google are like better people than the people that run Facebook, but they've been a little bit more like forthcoming with like, this is what we're changing, this is why we're changing it, and like this is the shit that we're trying to keep from happening. So every time there's been a major algorithm update, like you can basically adjust and figure out how to do well. But in reality, we've never had to worry about that because, and this is really like what I'm getting at, everything that we did from that point forward was just about, let's just make the most valuable shit that we possibly can. And that's it. Like really, we've never really played any algorithm games. We've never tried to like trick the algorithms or trick people or get fancy with like cloaking or anything like that. We just really spent time on making the best stuff that we possibly could. And because of that, I mean, for real, anytime there's been an update, I've always been kind of excited because my first thought is, I wonder who's going to get smoked. And my second thought is like, I wonder how good this is going to be for us, because we've always just spent time and money, like putting the best resources together. So owning your audience, that was the original question, right? Use Facebook, use Twitter, like use Instagram, use YouTube. I'm not saying don't use them, but use them. Don't let them use you, because that's what they want. They're using you for your content, because that's how they monetize. They take your content and they make money off of it. But so just flip the script, use them. And then instead of running ads on YouTube for like fucking 2 cents a CPM, funnel that traffic back to your website and then get something out of it. Like grow your product, grow your service, grow your audience through an email list. And you don't even have to monetize it right from the beginning, but if you start to build an email list, like you have some real options.
Yeah. In Tim's story, he has layers, and each project builds upon itself and creates another project.
It was at the time after doing Sober Nation for a couple of years that I just started getting some awareness, and how to have like treatment centers or, like we did some stuff on Sober Nation about eating disorders. And so there's a couple eating disorder facilities that would reach out to me and be like, man, how did you grow this brand? And like, can you do it for me? And it was at one of those moments where I thought to myself, oh my God, like Seth Godin, the stuff that he talked about came true, because he talked about, when I first heard him, he was doing this book called Purple Cow, and then he wrote this book called Linchpin, which really, really changed my life. And I was like, holy shit. I was like, I'm a linchpin, because I have this thing that you can't really teach and is specific only to me, right? And so that's when I went to Brian. I was like, Brian, I got it. We need to create an agency, and we need to specialize in all types of behavioral health stuff. And that's when it really started getting like, okay, this isn't as much of this project anymore, but like this could really be like a career, and this could be a business for us. And through that, that's when the conversations really started happening. Like we had to figure out how to hire employees. We had to figure out how to get employees to do the stuff that we needed them to do while wanting to do it, like we had to figure out having one employee and having two employees is a lot different than having like 12 employees. Doing like 10 grand a month is a lot different than doing like 100 grand a month. And so we founded Stodzi in 2012, I think, and it was about 2 years into Sober Nation. So yeah, that sounds right. And it's been the last 8 years of working with Brian where, I can't tell you how much stuff that we screwed up. Like everything that you could have possibly screwed up, we screwed up. Like I don't think there's anything that we did right the first time. And I really mean that. But that's kind of where like the fun is. Like we would just have so much fun experimenting with things and hopefully not screwing it up too bad to the point where like we could mess up somebody's business or affect the lives of our employees. And eventually we just got better at it. So like, I'm trying to answer your question directly, like what were the conversations that we had, but I don't think I can, because most of the conversations we would have were like, what do we do? Like, what do we do? We got this problem. What do we do? And we would just continuously work our way through it. And so, through Sober Nation, Stodzi was born. And then with Stodzi, we were able to actually build like a team, because in my view, agencies are great and they're great ways for people to make money. And I'm all about people building businesses. But what happened for us is it built like this family. And I know that's kind of cliche and people throw that around a lot, but our circumstance was really unique because it was a group of these 10 kids that kind of were trying to get sober together, and like we're all pretty smart but couldn't graduate high school, just because we couldn't keep our lives in check. And so we were just these 10 young kids that were intelligent enough to figure out how to do, but like angsty enough to be willing to take some risks. And so through that, this family of, I almost consider Stodzi within itself as like a tool. Yes, it's a business, but the thing that it is as like an autonomous entity is a leverage point for stuff. Because if I ever need something, I can just fall back on Stodzi to either do the work or do the research or something. And so that's how it's turned into like this multimedia sort of enterprise.
You start Stodzi, which is a very different thing than Sober Nation, in the sense of like it's not kind of a consumer, like here's content for you guys. This is very much client services, helping them. Although the target audience is, similar to Sober Nation, and a lot of those connections probably helped. So how did you start this in the sense of like getting clients and actually taking your passion and making that into a business that could really scale?
I had two advantages. One was that I was a writer, and I still think till this day, the most valuable skill, well, there's two of them, and I feel fortunate that I've inherited these skills to an extent. I can write and I can sell, and there's nothing like, if you want to build a business, I don't think there's anything more valuable. Sure, being good in front of a camera is a good skill. Sure, being creative and being a designer or creating podcasts and all that stuff, they're great skills. And there's plenty of people that have made great livings doing those things. But if you want to like really make money, being a writer and being able to just be able to like effectively ask people for money, it's uncomfortable, but you can be the best at anything in the world. But if you can't get anybody to pay you for it, then what do you have? Like you have some secret skill that maybe you can use for free, and good for you if that's what you want to do. I wanted to make money. It was a very conscious decision. Like you have to decide, I want to make money. It's not, it hasn't been my experience that it happens where you get those unicorns where you just stumble across this amazing product and all of a sudden you're like a millionaire. But most of the time, people that you see that make money made a decision that like, I want to make money. And that's what we did. And so when we started Buildingstadzi, I really took it upon myself. Brian is a much more operations kind of guy. He's just a better manager. I'm like a terrible manager. I'm a pretty good leader, but I took it upon myself to write all of the content for Stodzi And then as many phone calls as I can make, I would try to get as many deals as I could. And it's really just as simple as that. Like until you get to the point where you have a brand and your website has enough search value to where people just start calling you, which is where we're at now. And I'm very thankful for that. But the first 2 years, like, you got to bother people, like you got to get coffee meetings. You got to find people that are connected and like somehow convince them to hang out with you, and like, that's the thing about sales. People want sales to be like Google Analytics. They want it to be like some formula that they can follow. And, if I post this thing at this time of day and I send ads to this people, like that's not how it works, man. Like you have to bother people and you got to hustle. And more importantly, you got to have something that people want, because there's a difference between bothering people, which is just the way to, like, when I say bother people, I don't mean annoy people. I mean, like, be willing to call them, right? Be willing to knock on their door. But if you just knock on your door and you say, hey, give me some money, they're going to shut the door in your face. But if you knock on the door and say, like, hey, I have this thing that I've created, I'd like to give it to you for free. I'd like to test it out and let me know what you think about it. You do that enough times, and all of a sudden you have a reputation, and then you can leverage your reputation to get business. And that was really, it was as simple as that for me. It wasn't that easy, but it really was that simple. Like, I would write every day basically, and I wouldn't just write something and leave it alone. Like, I would continuously go back to stuff that I wrote, and I would see how it was ranking for certain keywords, and then see what was ranking for those keywords, and like constantly make my shit better. And then I would take every meeting I could. I would talk to every single person I could. I wasn't at that point yet where you hear people on Twitter be like, be willing to say no. Like, that wasn't my experience. If you were willing to talk to me, I was willing to talk to you. And eventually it got to the point where I didn't have to do that anymore, because now the Stodzi site ranks for so many different like healthcare marketing service terms that the phone rings for us. And it's a very fortunate position that we're in, but it certainly didn't happen overnight. It took like years of staring at the keyboard, staring at the screen, calling people, taking coffee meetings with people. It took years of feeling super uncomfortable. Like, this person must think that I'm a loser, or like, why would they want to hire me, or why would anybody want to read this? And then eventually you just get a little bit more confident. And then like one day you wake up and you're like, damn, I think we're doing it. And that's cool.
After the break, Tim shows us how we can become a better writer. This show is sponsored by Ketosis Collective. We are a marketing agency based in Austin, Texas, that is a personal marketing team to many businesses. We create photo and video content delivered to you each month to save you time and a massive headache when you're planning your social media for the month. If planning's too much for you, we can also run your social media accounts to give you more time to grow your business. You can visit our website at www.ketosiscollective.com. Now, let's get back to the show. Many will say that writing is a skill and anyone can get better at it. When someone like Tim has risen to become an incredible writer, the obvious question is, how do you get better at writing?
I got better at writing for the internet, which is different than writing a book, which is different than writing notes, right? I got better at writing for the internet through a website called Copyblogger. Copyblogger had a huge impact on my life. When I was building Sober Nation, I would wake up every single day and I would read the latest article on Copyblogger. There's a guy named Brian Clark. There's a woman named Sonia Simone. There's a gentleman named Damian Farnworth. There's another, this was a little while ago. She's a woman now, but she was very young at the time, I think in her early 20s. Her name was Stephanie Flaxman. Copyblogger is, in my view, the world's greatest resource to learn how to take ideas, figure out how to say these ideas in the shortest amount of words as possible, and also format them so that once you accept that most people aren't going to read the entire thing that you wrote, the next question is like, how do you format it in a way so that you can capture people's attention at the really, really important bits of information? And so that's how I got into learning about like headers and bullet points and bold and italics and things that you don't normally think about, which actually have a really huge impact on the user experience of at least an article. Copyblogger really changed my life. I've recently, at the end of last year, been able to purchase some stake in that. So I'm a partner in that website now, which was really like a dream come true to me. Brian Clark is the founder of Copyblogger, and Brian Clark, Seth Godin, my dad, and Tony Hawk were like my idols in life, right? And so to actually be almost like an apprentice to Brian Clark now, he's my business partner, but every time he talks, I'm still like, okay, whatever you say, man, like just tell me what to do and I'll do it. It's been a real honor. So like, my advice is Copyblogger. Like if you want to be a better writer, especially if you want to be a better copywriter, and especially if you want to be a better writer for the internet, which really where else are you going to write these days? Go to copyblogger.com. I don't know if I like have to say this. I am a partner in that for like disclosure and stuff. But even before I was a partner, I went on that site every single day and I read everything that they had to offer. I downloaded every ebook. I was good at writing stories, which allowed me to build a brand. Copyblogger made me good at taking attention and actually like turning it into something. And that made me like a better tech practitioner, a better tactician. And that was my experience. And I can't emphasize that website enough.
At the beginning of the interview, Tim mentioned having a notebook with him at all times. I wanted to understand on a personal level how Tim writes, creates content, and uses his notebook to excel each day.
Well, my process with my notebook is very loose. I don't write articles in my notebook. I've tried to do that. Like I remember one of my favorite writers is Chuck Palahniuk, and I remember him saying like, that's not writing, that's typing. And he writes, like the fact that he wrote Fight Club in a notebook, I remember thinking that and being like, okay, let me try that. And it just did not work for me. I can't do it. And same with Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman writes all of his stuff in notebooks, and it's just not for me. So what my notebook is, it's a way for me to basically weed out terrible ideas. And if I have it, I put it in my notebook. And if it sticks around, then it's probably not as bad an idea as the ones that didn't stick around. And if it sticks around even longer, then it's probably not as bad an idea as the ones that didn't stick around even longer. And it's also a really good like reflection point for me. What I do with my pen to paper notebook is I do like a daily inventory. And this may or not be something you're familiar with, but like when I got sober, a mentor of mine, he said, every night do an inventory. Like what did you do wrong, or where were you selfish, or where were you self-seeking? But what he also told me, which I never forgot, is don't beat the shit out of yourself. Like think about ways that you were proud of what you did as well. And I do that. I do it basically every night. If I don't do it at night, I wake up in the morning and I do it. It's just something very comforting to me. I'm not sure. It's just always been very comforting to me. I was that kid like writing out lyrics of songs in math class, and even just the act of writing, it's like a nervous tick. If I get nervous, like sometimes I just go sign my name on a piece of paper over and over again. I know that sounds very funny. It's like a comfort thing for me. But then the other thing I do, and this is a lot more of what I think you're getting at, which is my practice. Like I write the 5 things I need to accomplish tomorrow every night. And then that way, when I wake up in the morning, I don't have to think about what's on my plate today. Because my mornings, I like my mornings, man. I like getting my coffee. I told you that my parents made me read, and I like reading. And I think that people jump right out of bed and they just get after it, right? And sometimes I do that. Like if I'm inspired, I'm not saying that getting up and getting right to work is a bad thing. I'm just saying that my process likes me to gently ease into the day. And especially lately with the virus, but even before that, my wife and I have been sitting on the couch every morning and been reading together and like sharing what we learn about, because I'm kind of a history nerd. But then like the beautiful thing about it is when I'm done with that, I go to my notebook, and it's kind of like a ritual for me. It's always laid out right at this certain spot on my kitchen counter. And then I see like, this is what I have to do today, and I don't have to think about it. And so then I just bang them out. It's 5 things every day. I can always do 5 things every day. And sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm feeling really good, let me keep going. And in those situations, I don't. And then sometimes those 5 things are a lot of work. And if it's 6:30 and I need to push through to get that last thing done, then I do that. So that's my way of like keeping balance. Whereas it's not about the hours, you know what I mean? It's about like actually hitting that pinnacle point of like productivity. So if I have to put in a couple more hours to cross off that 5th thing, I do that. If I finish a little early, then I fucking chill. And that's my process.
How do you handle building multiple audiences and multiple projects, but keep this level of quality, right? Because I think it's easy for me to be like, well, I want to do this, I want to do that, but then quality kind of would suffer. So how have you been able to kind of leverage like project after project and continue to keep quality, heck, even grow these things while still being able to kind of expand the capacity of what's being done under you?
I don't know. Like I never thought of asking myself that question. The first thing that comes to mind is read the E-Myth. The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber is just one of the most valuable books that I've ever read, because it taught me the value of processes and systems, so that if you create something, you can figure out a way to replicate it without you personally being involved all of the time. And I that's been very valuable for me in terms of being able to build teams and like getting everybody looking in the right direction, just to, like we talked about before, like getting myself out of the way as quickly as I can. When you talk a little bit more about the audiences themselves, I would say 2 things. One, I would say, don't take shortcuts. There's too much bullshit. Like every time I see the word hack, I want to vomit. Like there's no hacks. I don't like, how did this even become a thing? Stop it. There's no life hacks. Like eat your vegetables, right? Like go run. There's no marketing hacks. Like tell good stories and create good products. I mean, I think Apple still doesn't even advertise on Facebook and stuff like that, right? But they're the most valuable company in the world because they just have the best product. It's really that simple. So don't take shortcuts. Avoid the word hack anywhere you can. If you ever find yourself on Twitter saying like, here's a life hack, just whatever you were gonna say, just delete it immediately.
Delete the line, delete it back.
So don't take shortcuts. But secondly, on that more core concept of building an audience, the other thing I would say is be very, very specific. Aside from like Tim Stoddart, my personal brand, which doesn't really have a point to it other than I just like to create and I like to talk to people. Everything that I've ever done has been for a very, very specific person. There's a book called Tribes by Sebastian Junger, which I thought was really, really cool. That was a little bit more like societal about tribes, but what I got out of that book and how I could apply it to my work is that, it's another Seth Godin thing. Like culture is people like us do things like this, right? And so the first thing you got to do is like, who are the people like us that do the things like this that I want to speak to? And the more specific you can be, like people want to be big. I don't think that's a good way to do it. You don't want to be big because the bigger you get, the more generic you have to get. Like what are the biggest things in the world? They're all generic, right? But the coolest things in the world are specific because they're made for specific people. So you don't need to have 1 million followers. You need to have like a couple thousand people who are just so passionate about the thing that you're trying to talk about that they're willing to buy from you. So, I mean, I read this article on Copyblogger the other day. I've always been kind of a nerd with comic books and magic cards and stuff like that. And there's this dude who's got a YouTube channel about magic cards. And you could go around and ask 1,000 people what magic cards are. And 90% of them aren't going to have a clue. But probably 1 out of 1,000 know exactly what magic cards are. And they probably all follow this guy because he just said, like, I'm the most specific person that there is to talk about magic cards. And if you want to really build an audience, the first thing you have to do is get out of this mind frame of bigger and get into the mind frame of specificity, because the bigger things are, the more generic they are, and the more generic something is, like the easier it is to throw it in the trash. Like what's the most generic things are the things that you don't care about, like a generic business card or something. You don't care about it. It doesn't mean anything to you. It's got no emotional attachment. But like magic cards, it's a ridiculous thing, but it's specific, and there's an emotional attachment to the people that love magic cards. So I get excited talking about those things. So forgive me for rambling on, but I would say the two things that have allowed me to do that is to not take shortcuts and to be very, very specific.
How much does discipline and consistency, how much does that play into building an audience, especially when you're first starting out?
When you're first starting out, it's everything. And as I've gotten older and I've reflected on this, and forgive me for getting a little bit like heady with this, but I've spent a whole lot of time with it, especially with just this hustle mentality, and like how much I hate that, and how much I think it's like terrible advice to tell young kids that they need to hustle, because if you keep hustling, eventually you burn out, and it takes, what you want to do is get out of your way as quickly as possible so that you can replace yourself. Like that, you can't actually build scale until you get out of the way. You need to have systems and processes in place to do that. So like I'm more weary to answer these questions now than I would have been like 8 years ago, when I was like so proud of the fact that I was working 70 hours a week, and that like I would run 50 miles a week, and I just would listen to these inspirational tapes like Eric Thomas, like grind, it's just not where I'm at anymore. And so I'm weary about giving advice that says effort, discipline, grit. But here's what I would say about that. The difference between, there's a woman, I think her name is Angela Duckworth, actually. She wrote a really
she wrote the book.
That's the book that
she wrote,
right?
Yeah, Grit.
Yeah, and all grit really means is just not giving up too early. It just means like being willing to work through it. It's like that shit Einstein said, right? I'm not that smart. I just stick with problems longer. Like, to me, that's what grit means. It just means that when something didn't happen the first try, it's not even about not giving up. It's just having the emotional fortitude to look at something and like be honest with yourself as to like why it failed, and then try a different way. And it doesn't even necessarily mean like try again. It just means iterate, right? It means, okay, what's a little tiny variable that I can change, and then do it, and then be willing to fail again. And then if it fails again, do it again and do it again. Like, that's what grit means to me. And then in terms of discipline, like, discipline's a word that really means a lot to me, because because I've struggled with the concept of it, because when I get too heavy into discipline, I feel like a robot, and I feel like I lose just fun in life. But in the same time, all of the things that I've done in my life that I'm proud of have come as a result of basically doing it every day. And it's not more complicated than that. Like, my fitness, I'm really proud of. My relationships, I'm proud of. Like, my personal blog, my podcast, you'll be doing this. Like, I've published a podcast every week since I started. With Sober Nation, dude, it's been 10 years, and like, we've just, I think what discipline does is it makes you give less fucks about how well something did, because it doesn't really matter, because it's not about how good this article was or how bad this article was. Like, I don't even really check anymore. It's just about like the process. It's just about like, okay, like the war of art. You know what I mean? Every day, if you win the war of art, it's a good day. And then when you wake up, it's a whole new battle. So all the stuff that you did yesterday doesn't count anymore. And you just got to do it again. And so when I think about grit and I think about discipline, I don't think of them as much in terms of like that, hoorah, like let's get after it type stuff. I think of it much more of like a chill, methodic, like low resting heart rate, just easy process that multiplies itself over the course of time.
I finish off the podcast with a segment called Open Mic. This is a chance for my guests to share anything they want. A lot of times, I feel like people get stuck behind the industry that they are in, but we are all human and have other interests outside of that. So this is a space for my guests to say whatever they want to say.
Open mic session, you told me this is the beginning of it, and I remember at that point thinking, I'm going to think of something during the conversation, and I didn't think of anything, and that's probably like the way that you plan it so that people can go off lib, right? Something that's been on my mind a lot over the last couple months with the virus is just coping with not having fun, basically. I never realized how important fun to me was until like I can't go to a concert anymore. And I was talking to my wife about it, and especially in Western culture, and I'm just as guilty of this, and I'm totally okay with telling people that like work's not supposed to be fun all the time, and like there's nothing wrong with that. For the majority of civilization, like people suffered just to stay alive, and I think like it's important to keep that into perspective. So just because you're not having fun doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong, right? But like I never really gave enough value just to those moments of just like hugging somebody. I never gave enough appreciation to, I go for walks every day. I had back surgery about a year ago, and it was really, really painful and really difficult. And so I go for walks every day because it helps me stay loose, but it's like an appreciation thing because I have mobility in my legs back again. And I've made it a point where every single time somebody drives past me, I wave to them, and they all wave back. And I just remember every time I do it, I remember thinking like every person waves back. Everybody wants to be waved to, like everybody wants to be hugged. Everybody wants to be approached and say like, hey, like you have really pretty eyes. Like, hey, I love your outfit. Or like, hey, you did something great that like I really admire or thought was creative. And so it's just given me a whole new appreciation to the idea of not so much connectivity, but like just relating to each other. And at the end of the day, even with all the madness going on with crazy people in our world, like we all have more in common than I think we have differences. We just get hung up because the way that we like express our values is different. But I know that if I keep waving to people, they're going to keep waving back. Like I would bet everything I have on it. I really mean that. Everything I have, it's 100% a fact. Every time I go for a walk, everybody I wave to, if they see me wave to them, they wave back. And that's really told me something about just this fear that I've had about like relating to people or like complimenting people or going up to strangers in the street. And, luckily my podcast has helped a lot with like constantly talking to people. But, man, like when this is over, I'm definitely going to make it a point to just get out there more and say hi to more people and not be rested on this lie I made in my head that like I'm an introvert, I'm not doing that shit anymore. When I get out, when this is over, like I'm meeting people, I'm shaking hands, I'm giving people hugs, and all the stuff that used to make me feel uncomfortable, I'm just ignoring it and I'm just doing it anyway. So that's my open mic.
Tim's story is inspiring because from the darkest times, he's risen above with a posture of gratitude. He is humble in this interview, but what he has accomplished and built has truly impacted thousands of people. Tim has now gone on to invest and continue to help people defeat addiction while teaching people how to write. Tim shows us that you have to battle every single day to write and reach your audience. You can follow Tim on Twitter and listen to his podcast, the Tim Stoddart Podcast. All the links to find Tim and his many projects will be in the show notes. Thank you, Tim, for being on the show. If you like this show, tweet me at Matthew Ketosis. And if you really love this show, drop a rating on Apple Podcasts or your podcast listening app. And I will talk to you next week.